keep
All
going.
right, we've got, is it Gregory and Eugene?
Yeah.
How are you, Gregory?
Somewhere between fairly spiffy and moderately neato.
I'll go with spiffy.
Okay. All right, what do you got for us?
Anyway, I've got a notion for what God might be if it exists. And first of all, let me preface this with saying I have zero stake emotionally or intellectually on whether or not you guys agree with it. I just thought I'd throw an idea on the table.
Okay.
So you're trying to define God?
Yeah. Sure.
Okay. All right.
If God exists, I would consider it a synonym for the phenomenon of human creativity. Because that's basically what we attribute to everything we've ever done, individually or collectively, for good or ill. We consider it an act of God. As creative beings, we still don't understand what exactly our creativity is or where it comes from. We can see the fruits of our ideas, whether it be coming together to build a radio antenna or a cannon. But as far as where those ideas come from, we still haven't figured that out yet. My basic understanding is that
I want to jump in.
don't
Yeah, go ahead.
know. My basic understanding is that we haven't exactly figured out what causes consciousness or thinking, or what the exact definition is, just that we can do it.
Well, there's you can make a God of the gaps argument there that we don't know X, therefore there must be God. But I wanted to respond to your definition directly, and it seems to me, you know, if I were going to define God, I would define it as sort of the sum total of our human ignorance. I would plane it on ignorance. It's like when you worship God, you're saying, well, I don't know how this is going to happen, but I want this outcome, or it's an act of God. The tsunami or the hurricane, whatever, is an act of God, and I don't know what caused it. And you even kind of touched on that at some point with your creativity. It's like we don't know how the creativity happens. So anyway, so that would be my counter proposal to you.
I'm glad that you're not particularly invested in what we happen to think about that definition, because while there are things about it that I like, in the sense that you're trying to put a label on what, by and large, most people mean at a different level when they're talking about God. I prefer Don's definition. The sum total of human ignorance, I think, is about the absolute best possible definition when you're talking about things at this kind of meta level. But the idea that God is human creativity, like I said, I'm glad you don't have much invested in this, because I'm just going to smack that down, is no different for me than saying God is this coffee cup. This coffee cup already has characteristics and a name and a label associated with it, and so does creativity. It has characteristics and it has a label, a number of labels, depending on languages. And the God label has to have, in my view, something in addition, something that is specific to it. It's not the rose by any other name thing. It's, I want to call a rose Philoglan. Okay, why? What does Philoglan mean? Well, it means a rose. Well, then why don't you just use the word rose? I mean, and I'm not talking to you, obviously, but if we're talking about creativity, then we should use the word creativity. And if somebody's using God as a substitute for the word creativity, it seems to me that they're implying some additional characteristics that are perhaps unstated, that the best you could maybe do is say that they're using it as God equals creativity plus.
Well, one statement I've heard multiple times from atheists, particularly Dick Dawkins, is that God can be seen as an imaginary friend, which I can totally agree with. And just because it's imaginary doesn't completely invalidate the concept, just makes it impractical for any external need of worship or obedience. And I think that's basically what God is, humanity's collective imaginary friend that we keep reinventing because our imagination keeps growing.
Okay.
Yeah, as long as everybody's clear, it's contingent on the human imagination. Then I'm happy.
But yeah, I don't see any reason to coddle someone with an imaginary friend, or show deference to their imaginary friend when it comes time for legislation or public events. And I certainly am not bound. I'm certainly not bound by what they think their imaginary friend wants me to do.
Yeah, and I think since most human beings are clearly creative beings, and in an immediate sense, we're creative beings, because most of us at some point figure out how our parents made us. It's very easy to take that and apply it to everything else and say, okay, if humans are created by other humans, then there's probably something that created the first humans. And there's probably something that created everything else, and then you can make the leap to an ultimate creator. But
and that would be a huge mistake.
You can go another direction on that. You can look around and say, well, are there uncreative things? For example, I don't know, a rock. Rocks don't strike me as very creative. If there are uncreative things, then it tends to reason that there could be things that are uncreative. For all I know, rocks and sand and dirt have probably just always been here. And maybe that's the way it is with the universe. Maybe the universe has just always been here without a creator, without a need for a creator. It's just a lot easier to imagine that the universe had a creator because I'm a creative being.
Yes, it's anthropomorphizing.
Yeah.
It seems like you're saying creation is creativity is a mystery, and the universe is a mystery. Therefore, they must have something to do with each other.
Well, we live.
Most people leap at.
We live.
I find that unfortunate.
We live our daily lives relying heavily on inference and induction. We expect the world to be pretty much the same today as it was yesterday. We're so good at it. I mean, here's a really good example for anybody who's driven a car for any length of time. I'm 40 now, so I've been driving for, 30 years or so. But when you're driving, especially if you're driving a route you've known before, you're not thinking about, your brain is working. It knows what your feet are doing, where your hands are in the steering wheel. It's surveying your speed, the speed of the cars around you. It's being observant for changes in speed, lights, signals, warnings, etc. And yet you can be thinking about something else entirely different, having a conversation with somebody in the car. And by and large, this isn't going to be a problem. I'm not saying go texting on your phone or anything, but by and large, you can do multiple different things. And it's because you are living your life based on expectations. The problem is that what happens when those expectations go wrong? Well, they don't go wrong so often that we really have to worry about it. But when we extend our inference to these vast scales, we are making a terrible error. I was the spawn of two living things, and they were the spawn of two living things, and therefore, eventually, this has to go back until, you could use that sort of induction as, therefore, there must be two gods who spawned the first living thing. Oh, but each of those had two, and so on, and so on. Induction and inference fail at some level, which is why when we begin to talk about what things really are, what exists, what is the nature of reality, we are wise to depend on deductive reasoning instead. And I agree that I think you're pointing out the mistake that a lot of people make and why it's made. I've never said, for example, I fully accept that religion as practiced can be beneficial to individuals, and I fully accept that invisible friends can be of value. The question is, does that justify us, maintaining a relationship with an invisible friend forever because it was of value here, or are we avoiding a greater value that we might find, that we might discover, if we abandon these things that aren't real and focus instead on reality? Which is why I ended up with my mantra of... In a collective sense, I think humankind is on the verge of outgrowing the need for that imaginary friend, and that could take us, the next 2 or 3 or 5 centuries. It's going to be a long, hard struggle letting go of that, but I could see that as an eventuality. At this point, I consider myself just as much of an atheist as I do a theist. Well, that's absolutely absurd. Well, that's like saying I consider myself just as much a basketball as not a basketball. Well, that is a completely irrational, illogical statement.
Cut him some slack.
Yeah.
No.
I care about it.
I don't. Okay. Hang on, real quick. Hang on, real quick. I don't cut anybody slack. PZ Myers was on Nonprofits 2 weeks ago. He said something that I completely agree with. We welcome ideas, we welcome discussion, we welcome everybody, but do this with the knowledge that when you say something stupid, you're going to be flayed alive. And when people say something like, I am just as...
I open myself up to that. That's why I said that, and I don't mind being flayed.
But
here's my position. Life's too long to settle for one set of options and to settle for one set of beliefs. I can have fun with either one. I can look at the universe and see the presence or absence of a creator and look at either one and say, yeah, I can dig that. If there's a creator, no big deal. I'll meet it when I die. If there's not a creator, no big deal. I won't even know about it when I die because I probably won't consciously be aware that I'm dead.
Well, it sounds like you're in the middle of some sort of longer-term process, and I think for a lot of atheists, as they sort of come out and deal with these things, it's a multi-year thing of examining the evidence there, and I can see potentially being somewhere in the middle of that and empathizing with both sides. That's what I meant by cutting slack, is I can see somebody in a position where that they can see the value of both viewpoints, but maybe
the atheist scientist crowd definitely makes more sense. But the irrational, religious, mystic crowd is a lot of fun to hang out with and talk with. And I think it's
probably more emotionally satisfying.
Yes, right? But the words have meanings. And theism carries with it the meaning that one believes there is a God. And that is a binary position. Either you believe that there is a God or you do not. There is no in between.
Maybe you can change
that's the fun thing about any dividing line is you can take an eraser, erase that line, and have...
No, you can't.
Objectively, wait.
No, you cannot.
Objectively, one is true and the other isn't.
No, you are not understanding me. Okay. You are not understanding me because you are setting up a false dichotomy. I said either you believe that a God exists or you do not believe. That is not the same thing as you believe a God exists or you believe no gods exist. That is something different. There is a single claim, God exists. Either you believe that claim or you do not believe that claim. There is no middle ground. There is no line to erase. I can draw you a Venn diagram that demonstrates it. This is logic 101. There are no middle ground options. What you're doing...
Make a statement that I think we can both agree on, and have you tell me if I'm right?
Okay.
That in the objective sense of truth, one or the other is true, but both cannot be true. It's either true that there is a God or it's true that there is no God.
Correct.
Both are incapable of being true.
Correct.
However, I can believe whatever I want. I can
You're right.
believe both.
No, you can't.
You
can't. You cannot do that. How can you possibly do that?
Humans aren't logical sometimes.
No. It's not a matter of not being logical. No, stop. It's not a matter of not being logical. It's a matter of honesty. You cannot simultaneously say, I believe there is a God and I believe there's not a God. One of those is a lie. One of those you don't really believe. You're just saying. You cannot be in that position.
You're assuming a brain's a monolithic thing. People compartmentalize their beliefs all the time.
There's a difference between...
You're wrong. I just don't see how you're right.
Humans are messy.
Wow. I'm not going to say you're wrong. I just don't see how you're right. That sums up the problem. Thanks.
Thanks for calling.
This goes back to a lot of people profess a belief. And I don't care what people profess. It matters on some level. I'm a Christian. Maybe you're not, but that's what you're professing, and on that level it matters because your actions are going to, reflect how people perceive Christians or Jews or Buddhists and Muslims, anything. But in reality, in actuality, on a single issue, on a single statement of X exists, it is true that either that statement is true or that statement is not true. I fail to see how anybody could say they simultaneously believe both of them. Now, maybe you believed one yesterday and a different one today. Maybe you're vacillating back and forth between the two of them. But to say that you simultaneously believe X and not X is insane. You should go seek professional help if you think that that's true.
Well, you can't build anything on that, right? Yeah. That's a contradiction, and you can't you can't make any real moral decisions or you can't base any decisions on a premise like that.
Which is why I flatly assert that the people who do that are deceiving themselves and or trying to deceive others, or batshit crazy. And you didn't strike me as that type of person. So I think you're engaged in a little self-deception.